The cameras were supposed to be watching royalty, but somehow every lens kept drifting to the same place. Not the Queen, not the veterans, not the award winners, Meghan Markle, and not by accident. Because if there's one thing that observers, critics, and even body language analysts keep whispering about, it's this. Meghan doesn't just attend events, she performs them. Every entrance becomes a stage. Every photo becomes a scene. And every moment somehow circles back to the same question. Was the event happening, or was Meghan making sure the spotlight never left her? Self-love is healthy, necessary even. Everyone deserves confidence, but there is a thin line between confidence and performance, between valuing yourself and quietly assuming the room revolves around you. And critics say Meghan Markle doesn't just step over that line, she struts across it like a runway model who knows the cameras are already rolling. According to many royal watchers, what begins as empowerment sometimes morphs into something far more theatrical, something that makes people in the background start to look less like guests and more like extras in someone else's show.
My gosh, I work so hard, and I appreciate what hard work looks like. I like working hard. And I'm still working hard, right? The moment that everything sells out, it doesn't mean that we're done. Yeah. It means we're working on replenishment and what are the next SKUs and what's the next tranche of products and what's the timing on that, and writing the newsletters and writing the social media captions and making sure that all that feels in line, and what's the cadence of it, and what's the photography that we want to do, and what do I want to wear for those shoots.
Insert clip from NOLA 039 to 0107. And once you start noticing the pattern, it becomes impossible to unsee, because this wasn't just about one awkward moment. It was a series of moments, a trail of tiny incidents that, when stitched together, paint a strangely consistent picture. A smile held a little too long for the camera, a pose that lingers even after everyone else has moved on, a glance that scans the room not for people but for lenses. And then came the Invictus Games. On the surface, it was supposed to be about veterans, resilience, and the athletes competing on the field. Prince Harry's passion project, his legacy, the reason the world was watching. But somewhere between the cheers and the cameras, another quiet moment slipped through, and critics say it revealed everything. Meghan looked down at her outfit. A subtle pause, a quick adjustment, then something unexpected. She unbuttoned her shirt slightly, just enough to shift the look, just enough to change the frame. And then came the glance, left, right, scanning the area like someone checking whether the cameras had caught the moment. Except the moment didn't land. The cameras didn't explode. The crowd didn't react. And for a split second, the scene hung in the air awkwardly, like a performance that hadn't received its cue. But that wasn't the first time people noticed something unusual. Because rewind a little further and another moment starts to stand out.
Wear for those shoots while also editing all the time-coded notes for season 2 of With Love Meghan, and then being in edits for the podcast, and being a mom and a wife and a friend.
Now here's where things start getting really interesting. During a visit to Rwanda, the atmosphere was festive. Music, dancing, locals celebrating together, everyone moving in rhythm, arms raised, smiling naturally. It looked spontaneous, genuine, except for one person. While everyone else danced in sync, Meghan stood differently, arms stretched outward, almost theatrically, as if the scene had been blocked out like choreography in a film. And then came the dramatic flourish. She blew a kiss toward the crowd. A kiss in the middle of a humanitarian trip. Observers watching the footage later couldn't help but ask the same uncomfortable question. Was the moment about the people or about creating a moment? Because the camera seemed to matter a lot. Some critics even joked that the Rwanda trip, intended to highlight charity work, ended up looking more like a beauty commercial than a humanitarian mission. The pauses, the angles, the careful positioning, it all felt strangely cinematic. But the pattern didn't stop there. In fact, if anything, it became more obvious during the 2018 Australian tour. Picture the scene: an award ceremony, a winner standing proudly, trophy in hand, ready to celebrate their achievement. A simple, respectful moment where the spotlight should belong entirely to the person who actually won. Except that's not quite what happened. Instead of stepping aside after presenting the award, Meghan reportedly nudged the recipient closer to the cameras, almost ushering them into position while remaining firmly within the frame herself. It wasn't aggressive, not obvious, just noticeable enough that viewers later questioned why the moment seemed choreographed. A quiet repositioning, a subtle adjustment. But again, the cameras stayed exactly where they needed to be. Then came another moment, one that royal watchers replayed over and over again. Arrival at Windsor Castle. Prince Harry and Meghan stepping out of the car, greeted by an organizer waiting to welcome them both. Traditionally, the greeting would unfold naturally. A handshake, maybe a quick exchange of words. Instead, Meghan moved first, quickly. She stepped forward and embraced the organizer with such enthusiasm that Prince Harry briefly looked like he'd been edited out of his own entrance. He stood there, waiting politely while the greeting stretched on, and only after several seconds did the focus shift back to him. It wasn't dramatic, no raised voices, no confrontation, just another moment where the spotlight quietly shifted direction. And by now, a curious pattern had started forming. Moments where Meghan seemed slightly ahead of Harry, slightly more centered, slightly more aware of where the cameras were pointed. Then came the dancing incident, an event where music filled the room and people mingled casually. Most attendees were sitting, chatting, enjoying the atmosphere. Nothing unusual, except Meghan began dancing. Not wildly, not embarrassingly, just noticeably. Enough movement that people nearby turned their heads. But critics watching later noticed something else. While she danced, her eyes appeared to scan the room repeatedly, as if searching for something or someone, more specifically, a camera angle. Because in a room where almost nobody else was dancing, the one person moving suddenly becomes the focal point. Coincidence? Maybe. But then came the microphone moment, and this one people definitely noticed. At a public event, both Meghan and Harry were invited on stage to present an award together. A simple appearance, a shared moment, the kind of thing royal couples do all the time. Except as they approached the stage, Meghan stepped ahead, not slightly, clearly, and as the host held the microphone, something unusual happened. Meghan reached toward it, almost as if preparing to take it and begin speaking, but the host didn't release it. There was a brief, awkward hesitation, a split-second tug-of-war that ended with Meghan letting go and moving forward instead. But by then, the moment had already spoken for itself, because sometimes the smallest gestures reveal the biggest intentions. And yet, perhaps the most revealing moment of all happened during another Invictus Games appearance. This time, the cameras weren't focused on Meghan at all. The tension didn't fade after those moments. If anything, it quietly escalated, because once people began watching closely, the pattern became harder and harder to ignore. Each public appearance seemed to reveal another tiny clue, another blink and you miss it moment, where the spotlight subtly shifted direction, and critics began asking an uncomfortable question. Were these just coincidences, or were they calculated moves in a performance that never truly stopped? The Invictus Games gave observers another moment that people would replay repeatedly. Prince Harry had paused mid-walk to speak with a woman who had stopped him. It looked like a completely normal interaction. Harry listening, nodding, focused on the conversation. For a moment, the cameras drifted away from Meghan entirely. The scene was natural, unscripted. But then Meghan stepped closer, not slowly, quickly. She reached for Harry's shoulder and pulled him back toward her, cutting the conversation short almost instantly. The motion was subtle, but firm. Harry's focus snapped away from the woman he had been speaking to, and in the next second, Meghan was already moving forward, guiding the direction of their walk as if the pause had never happened. To some viewers, it looked protective. To others, it looked strategic. But one thing was clear: the moment shifted the attention back where it had been before. And then came the polo photograph, a simple group photo with the team. Players standing proudly after the match, dignitaries gathering around for pictures, the kind of arrangement where everyone naturally takes a place according to protocol. Except Meghan was standing directly in the center. Organizers reportedly asked her politely to step slightly to the side so others could join the frame properly. A routine request, something that happens at every large event. But Meghan didn't move. Instead, she remained firmly planted in the center position, smiling as if the instruction had never been given. The seconds stretched awkwardly as people around her waited for the adjustment that never came, because stepping aside would have meant stepping out of the central frame. And critics say that was the one position Meghan never seemed willing to surrender. But the next moment would spark an entirely different conversation, one that people still debate to this day, because it involved something far more personal. During Meghan's pregnancy, observers began noticing a peculiar habit that repeated itself again and again. Whether she was walking a red carpet, stepping out of a car, or attending a formal appearance, the same gesture kept appearing on camera: the coat flick. Over and over again. Instead of casually letting her coat hang naturally, Meghan would swing it open dramatically, revealing her baby bump in a way that seemed unusually deliberate. Cameras nearby? Coat flick. Public appearance? Coat flick. Even during routine outings, the gesture appeared with almost theatrical precision. Most expectant mothers instinctively shield their bump, holding their hands protectively over it without even thinking. But Meghan seemed to do the opposite. She displayed it, positioned it, presented it to the cameras as if unveiling something precious that needed to remain visible at all times. At first, it sounded playful, harmless, just a light joke about the size of his bite. But some viewers felt the tone shifted slightly as she continued, repeating repeating the comment while the cameras rolled. It turned a private joke into a public moment, one that redirected attention toward her reaction rather than Harry's experience. And that wasn't the only time critics say she publicly diminished him. At another event, she jokingly referred to Harry as crashing the party, while explaining his involvement in a project he had actually been working on for years. The comment drew laughs, but some royal watchers found it strange, because the project in question had been part of Harry's work since 2013, long before Meghan entered the picture. To them, the remark felt less like humor and more like another subtle shift of the spotlight. But perhaps one of the most uncomfortable moments happened with someone who wasn't even part of the royal circle, just a woman trying to avoid the cameras. During an event, the woman stood quietly at the edge of the frame, clearly hoping not to be photographed. She leaned slightly away from the lenses, trying to remain unnoticed. Meghan noticed, and instead of letting the woman remain in the background, Meghan reached out and pulled her into the shot. Suddenly, the woman was front and center, clearly uncomfortable as the cameras flashed. Her expression revealed the tension instantly, but Meghan remained smiling, posing confidently as if nothing unusual had happened. Because when the moment belonged to Meghan, everyone nearby seemed to become part of the scene whether they intended to or not. And that brings the story full circle. 15 moments. 15 tiny snapshots of behavior that critics say reveal something deeper. Maybe they were innocent gestures. Maybe they were misunderstood. Or maybe they were pieces of a much bigger pattern. A pattern where the spotlight always drifts back to the same person. Because when Meghan Markle enters a room, something strange seems to happen. The cameras tilt, the angles shift, and somehow, no matter what the event is supposed to be about, the scene begins to feel like it's revolving around one central character. Whether that was intentional or not remains the real mystery. But the footage exists, the clips circulate, and the internet continues to debate every frame. So now the question quietly passes to the audience watching it all unfold. Out of those 15 moments, which one made you pause the longest? Made you pause the longest? Made you pause the longest? Made